Asalamualaikum guys, welcome back. This video will be a final tutorial about loops, however you'll get to see examples of using loops from time to time in future tutorials. So you may have seen previous tutorials on control flow statements like the if-else condition and the loops, and for this video we'll be going over nested loops, where nesting just means having a control statement followed by another control statement within it. So to give you an example of a nested if statement, say I use if 3 is greater than 2, followed by a print of its condition 3 greater than 2, and then applying another if statement but inside the block saying if 5 is greater than 3, which will also have a print statement of its own condition. Alright, when I run the program, you'll see these statements printed out here. 3 is greater than 2, which was a true condition, therefore its print appears here, and 5 is greater than 2, which also appears for the same reason. Cool. So this was just an example of nesting if statements, and we're going to be applying the same thing now but with loops. So let's try out some nested for loops. I'll just type in for I in range 8 as the parent loop, followed by the inner loop for j in range 8, and this inner loop can print out the counter variables I and j here. Alright, by running the program, we'll get a bunch of numbers printed out vertically in the console. At first, these numbers don't make sense, but if you take a closer look, you'll see a pattern here. For every number 0 up to 7, for example, we have its own loop of the numbers 0 up to 7. So by looking at the zeros here on the left, these are I values from the parent loop for I in range 8, and the numbers on the right are the j values from the inner loop for j in range 8. So for each I printed out, the inner loop will be executed printing out j values 0 up to 7, therefore having 7 zeros for each j value 0 up to 7 here. Cool. Also looking at this from the next iteration, where the inner loop will print numbers 0 to 7, for the parent loop's iteration at I equals 1, and going about the same for the rest of the ij values. Awesome. So you may now see what's going on, and to make this pattern a bit more clearer, I'll adjust the print statements here a bit. So the counter j will be printed out in its own loop, but in horizontal order by using the end parameter of the print function. And this inner loop will be sandwiched by two print statements. So at the top I'll print out inner loop as an indicator with a blank end parameter inside, and the last print statement at the end here saying for I equals the value I. So for every I iteration, we'll see all the print statements here presented horizontally in one line, since we applied the end parameter with a blank, which would attach the next print statement after it in one line. Awesome. By running the program, you'll see a better presentation of the nested pattern in the console. So let me read this first print with detail. Inner loop has occurred from j values 0 up to 7 for the iteration I equals 0, and then the same thing for the next one. The inner loop has produced numbers 0 to 7 for the parent loop's iteration at I equals 1, and going about the same for the rest of the lines below. So the underlying concept of this nested loop is that whatever loop you put inside the parent loop, for every value I, you'll get the j values printed out from the inner loop, just as any lines of code would be repeated according to the main loop's condition. Sweet. You can play around with nested loops and do all kinds of things. I remember from my college days in a Python introductory course, where we students had to generate shapes with nested loops as part of a challenging assignment. And oh boy, what a task it was. So let's give it a go, making some triangles with nested loops. Let's start with a right-angled triangle. So our shape will be presented in the console in strings with any kind of symbol. We'll just go with zeros. You can see that I've set the parent loop as for I in range 7, followed by for j in range I, which will have its own print 0 statement, and we'll set the same print statement outside of the inner loop at the end here. Alright. The code so far will just print out zeros vertically in the console, which of course we don't want. So the game changer will be to apply the end parameter in the inner loop's print statement, just using a blank here. What's going to happen is that for every iteration in the parent loop, we'll have the inner loop print zeros in horizontal order, and the one line of zeros will stack up in increasing order, with an increasing range of the inner loop per iteration. Running the program will show us our right-angled triangle with a height of 7 zeros. Pretty cool. To see an upside down version of the triangle, I could simply reverse the range of the parent loop by using the slice notation here with a step of -1. Now if you don't know what a slice notation is, I talked about it in my tutorial on strings. You can check out the video with the mentioned timestamp if you'd like to learn about it. Cool. So now when I run the program, we'll get our triangle printed out upside down in the console. Awesome. Now for the last part of this video, let's try generating a more complex shape, a pyramid of zeros. This task may sound a bit daunting at first, but as long as you think of a code logic step by step for your nested loops, you are bound to reach your desired result, and you'll feel quite happy about it. Alright. So now we know how to generate the half right of a triangle. We can just apply additional lines of code in the same parent loop to get the left half of the pyramid. To do that, we'll add in another for loop before the inner loop below, saying for j in range 7 minus I, which will print out blank spaces in horizontal order. When I run the program, you'll see that we get the left half of the pyramid. Cool. So looking at this code logic, in the first iteration of the parent loop, we'll have for j in range 7 minus 0, which will produce a horizontal line of 7 blank spaces. The next loop will be read as for j in range 0, which is a false condition, so this loop is skipped, and the last print statement here will be attached at the end of the first loop's result, giving us the first line of the triangle here. In the next iteration of the parent loop, this inner loop will print out a horizontal line of 6 blank spaces, given that its condition will be 7 minus 1. Then the next inner loop will be for j in range 1, which will produce 1, 0. And we can see that both the inner loops use a print statement with the end parameter, so this first loop's blank spaces will be attached to the 0 of the next loop, and the last print statement 0 will be attached at the end of the joined result of the loops. Therefore, you'll see the next line of the triangle here, and going about the same for the next lines that will make up the shape. Awesome. Now to complete the code for the pyramid, we can simply apply back the inner loop used for the right half of the triangle, which is the same as this one, for j in range I. Copy pasting it here. So we've really just merged the code blocks of the two triangles if we take a closer look at the code. Cool. When I run the program, we'll finally have our pyramid printed out in the console here. Awesome. And to make our code a bit more efficient, you can see that the number 7 is repeated in our code in the range conditions. Let's replace it with a variable named n, which we can define as the size we'd like to set for our pyramid before actually generating the shape. So let's print out a pyramid with the size n equals 20. Running the program will then show a bigger pyramid here with a height of 20 zeros. Awesome. So that's pretty much it on nested loops in this tutorial. I hope this video helped you gain some knowledge on nesting control statements. Nested loops are quite useful in many programming tasks, and you may see me use them in future tutorials. Alrighty. So we've now reached the end of this video. Stay tuned for tutorial number 10, which will be about lists. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have an awesome day. Take care. Asalamualaikum.